All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of Irish Sports Daily Official Visit. We got a different kind of show tonight, a really, really good guest. Anybody that knows me well in the Irish Sports Daily community knows that I am all in on college football fantasy. I think it's one of the most underrated it is the most underrated form of fantasy out there. People don't know what they're missing. I myself have been quite successful in my own college fantasy leagues. And my friends all think it's because I cover college football recruiting for a living. It is not. The reason is our guest today, Joe DiSalvo from theCFFsite.com. He is my secret weapon. I'm kind of displaying that, kind of ruining my secret here, but I wanted to share it with irishsportsdaily.com. Have Joe come on and kind of talk about it. Joe, first of all, thanks a lot for joining us, man.
Look, glad to be on with you. And whenever I have a chance to carry the flag for college fantasy football, I rarely say no. So glad to be on with you guys and really glad to share a lot about my passion and sorry for unveiling us as your secret weapon. But look, man, I'm excited to get into it. Let's chat some college fantasy football. We'll get into some Notre Dame stuff as well. So wherever you want to take me, I'm ready, man.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I think a lot of people are just intimidated. They say, oh, college fantasy, that must be too hard. It must be too crazy. All the teams. I mean, it's not. Explain to the people why college football fantasy. Why do you love college football fantasy?
Well, first of all, let me say this. One of the things I love about college fantasy football is it's not traditional NFL fantasy, right? I go back 15 plus years of college fantasy football. I say this at least once, and now it feels like I'm saying it 3 times a year. You know, when you're playing in an NFL fantasy league, you're hoping your running back goes for 100 yards and a touchdown, right? That's a good week for one of your fantasy running backs in the NFL. But for college, however the format you want to play, you know, we're hoping that our running backs go for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. The one thing that makes the college fantasy football format so unique is that there could be a lot of scoring. And, you know, you're right. It can be intimidating for a lot of people, which was the reason why I started the CFF site 12 years ago. It was to be an online resource for those that thought college fantasy football could be an overwhelming, task. And it's a little daunting when you look at 130 teams, Christian. It could be a bit overwhelming just for the casual fan. You know, the one big obstacle with college fantasy football is there's attrition, right? I mean, guys graduate and go to the NFL. So much like I say this all the time, my wife can play NFL fantasy football because the Peyton Mannings and the Drew Breeses and the Tom Bradys are around for 15 years, and they know who those guys are. In college, really what college fantasy football does is it really steps it up a notch. It gives an edge to the guy that's willing to do a little bit more homework, a little bit more research, go in depth about some of the programs. But one of the greatest things about college fantasy football is it's customizable. You don't have to play with 130 teams. You know, speaking to you fans out there that are Notre Dame fans, you can customize your leagues to be Power 5 only because we run the leagues over at fantrax.com. A little plug for them. They do a great job at hosting these college fantasy football leagues, or you can make them team specific. You and your buddies can pick out your 20 favorite teams and create a league that way. So there's a way to scale it down and making it enjoyable. All you really have to do is mirror your scoring for the NFL fantasy, for your college fantasy, scale it down with the number of teams. And man, let me tell you something, and I'll just say this as sort of a testimonial here, is that I've been doing fantasy football for a number of years. And when I first got the college fantasy football in-house league together, before I even have the website, a lot of the same guys that played in my NFL fantasy league played in the college fantasy league as well. And I will say overwhelmingly 3/4 of them enjoyed the college fantasy game a lot more than they enjoyed the NFL fantasy. It was different. It was more exciting. It was just a lot more scoring. And, that league has stayed together over the years, man. And we still love it to this day.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got buddies. They won't touch NFL fantasy, but they're all in college. Don't even want to hear about NFL. And then I have buddies they'll do the opposite, but those people have never touched NFL college fantasy. Anyone I know who's ever played college fantasy, that's a real fantasy player, prefers the college game. And it's exactly like you said. 100 yards and a touchdown, that's a monster game in the NFL. You're just hoping your guy maybe gets 2 catches, 30 yards, and maybe vultures a touchdown in the end zone. That's not, that's not exciting. I like being down 30 points and I got Christian McCaffrey going at 10 o'clock at night and feeling comfortable because I know he's going to get it done. You find out about these guys that you never heard of. We said, my buddy, my late friend of mine, Christian, he passed away, but he had Patrick Mahomes. We didn't really even know who Patrick Mahomes was. And he was at Texas Tech. But all my buddies knew who he was by the time he got to the Chiefs. It's just so much more fun. There's so much more scoring, like you said. But, you do have to do
our site goes back to the days when Case Keenum was airing it out at Houston. Colt Brennan was airing it out at Hawaii. I mean, look, it goes on and on. Look, the one thing, too, I'll say real quick, if you don't mind me getting this in, is the one thing that really changed the landscape for college fantasy football enthusiasts is that if you do love college football and you have a passion for it and you love fantasy, that's the reason why I created the CFF site to kind of help. We've got the preseason fantasy draft guide that we've been putting out now for a number of years. And really what it does is it helps some of the casual fans or casual college fantasy football enthusiasts that you guys want to bring in, create your own league. It's sort of, we've got player rankings. We've got draft day cheat sheets. We've got everything from recruiting type. Who's the incoming freshman? Where's the offensive line? How many returning linemen does each program have? I mean, we've got it all. Everything that you could use, and you have a copy that you need for your college fantasy football draft. The CFF site's got it, and we've got everything in season as well. Preseason player projections, weekly player projections. We're doing DFS content. If you're into doing player props, Christian, I mean, look, you've been, thankfully you've been a fan of ours over the years. There's not much that we have. There's not much that we don't have that you need to play college fantasy football. We've got everything covered for you from the preseason, draft day, all the way through the regular season. CFF site's got it.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to take a lot of load off you. You're not going to have to be stressed about it. You can lean on it, and it's going to help you win. I know when we do our in-season stuff, I can tell who, they don't tell me. I know there's guys in my league that are members because we're going after the same guys when it comes to the waiver wire. Like you didn't know who that guy was. Joe told you who that guy was. So, but it'd be great. Yeah. And listen, I'm putting myself out there. I know there's going to be some people here watching this that are in my draft. We have a draft on Wednesday. Right?
Well, look, here's the thing, and I did a show on this not that long ago. And look, if you visit the CFF site and you've never been there, not only do we have all the preseason content, my partner and I, Mike Bainbridge, we've done a lot of preseason shows on YouTube where we've gone in depth on some of the conferences, some of the big teams. I mean, the one point that I try to make is that if you really want a fun and competitive league, Christian, you've got to be able to share the resources with everyone. That's the fun thing about making the league competitive, is making everyone feel like they've got a shot. You don't want to create a league where 3 or 4 guys are in the running every single year, and you're trying to find 3 or 4 guys because they never finish at the top and they're not interested. The best thing you could do to make your college fantasy football league competitive is fill everyone in on the resources that you use, where you give your information. And next thing you know, man, you've got everybody hook, line, and sinker. And I'll tell you, you get a guy into college fantasy football that really loves college football or really loves to have a little bit of edge by doing a little bit of homework and research, you've got it. That's all it takes. Get them in one time. You love that stuff. You are going to love college fantasy football. You've just got to dip your toe into the waters, and the CFF site's there to help you out. Come on board, get in with Christian, or form your own leagues. Reach out to us via email. We'll tell you where to go, how to set them up. Man, look, you can tell this is my passion. I love talking college fantasy football, man. Let's get into it.
We'll get it. We'll get a league set up for ISD. Don't worry about it. All right. Like I said, I've got, like you talked about the customizable leagues and the teams and stuff. I got a draft on Wednesday. I've got the 3rd overall pick. And I told Joe beforehand, Central Michigan is included in this. It's mostly Power 5. Who am I targeting in the top 3 across the Power 5 league, including Central Michigan?
Well, when you're talking Power 5 and you're throwing Central Michigan in there, right? I'll go there first, just with Central Michigan, because the one thing about the MAC teams and these group of 5 teams, and I say this, sometimes they have they have a tougher first 4 weeks of the season because they're playing some of the big guys in non-conference slates. I believe Central Michigan plays Oklahoma State in the non-conference slate as well. But when those guys get the MAC conference, I talked at the beginning of the show, you want to go for those running backs that go for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Well, you've got Lou Nichols over there who led the FBS in rushing last year. It's hard to ignore that guy. I would imagine he's going to be one of the first picks in the draft. But I mean, you've got Travion Henderson over at Ohio State. You got Bijan Robinson over at Texas. You got, from the quarterback at Ohio State, Alabama. I mean, you've got some weapons there in the Power 5 conferences. So, when you're talking Lou Nichols, it's hard to ignore that group of 5 player amongst the Power 5. I would think he's going to be within the top 5 of the draft, but Jackson Smith and Jigba, right, over at Ohio State, particularly if you play in a PPR league or even a half-point PPR league. There's some guys that are jumping at that wide receiver early because there's a bigger drop-off in production from the top-tier receivers to the second tier, whereas you can kind of wait on some of the top-tier quarterbacks as well. And the greatest thing about college fantasy football, and I don't know how your league's set up, but you could play single quarterback. You could play two quarterbacks. There's so many different formats that you can make. But, yes, Lou Nichols is a guy that you're going to be looking at and targeting within probably one of the top 3-4 picks of your draft, 5 for sure, I would imagine.
So we're looking at Smith and Jigba, Lou Nichols, maybe Bijan Robinson, and Travion Henderson. Are those kind of the top 4-ish guys right now?
Yeah, I think so. And I think what's really interesting is considering the guys in your draft and who you're drafting with. It's going to be what I'm more curious about is to see where guys go up to get some of those Notre Dame players, right? So, when I'm playing in in my draft with a bunch of guys, we're kind of full FBS, everything's open, and a lot of us, we have our ties to our team, right? So, sometimes your tendency is to go get your guys at your schools a little bit earlier. If all of you guys are tied into Notre Dame, the question is going to become, when do I go out and get my guy, right? Particularly maybe like a tight end over at Michael Mayer over there, right? Who's going as our number 1 tight end for college fantasy football. So he'll more than likely be one of those early picks for you guys. And I'm curious to see where some of those Notre Dame guys go off the board, knowing that you guys kind of bleed that blue and gold up there.
Absolutely. I mean, Mayer, he is just a beast. I mean, he's been a beast since day one. And the value, and you talked about the value of being a tight end 1, that is a premier position in college fantasy football, isn't it?
Well, it is. And the one thing that's really unique about college fantasy football, and this is the drum that I beat as well, is that you don't have to lock in. This isn't NFL. You don't have to play with a tight end. You can enroll the tight ends into wide receivers in college fantasy football and even make it more wide open. But what's interesting is that your tight end up there, more than likely, we have him finishing as really the wide receiver 1 with Notre Dame this year. Yep. So I'd be curious to see how that plays out up there with the receivers, because Mayer for us is actually the Notre Dame wide receiver 1.
Yeah. Let's get into Notre Dame. Obviously, Tyler Buchner's announced as starting quarterback last week. Not much of a surprise to anybody. Has proven what he can do with his legs. I promise you, Ohio State's going to make him prove what he can do with his arm. What are your thoughts on Buchner right now?
Well, it's funny because I'm going to come back to you a little bit on this with Buchner, because we've got such a small sample size on him from last year, right? We've seen what he can do with his legs. We see, the potential that's there, but how's he going to do with the reins, taking over full time? We have him projected pretty high this year, particularly in a full FBS draft. He's probably somewhere between the 25 and 30 range, because we know he can do some damage with his legs. And, for college fantasy football, that dual threat quarterback is oh so important. But we've got him ranked right in that, 25, 30 range with the site. And, when you look at the Notre Dame schedule, it doesn't look too daunting. You've got the opener at at Ohio State, right? You've got a matchup in there against Clemson, which I believe is at home. And then you end the year at USC, which, for many of you guys playing college fantasy football is going to be the championship week. So if you get there, and I don't think really looking at the Notre Dame schedule, I think offensively, you guys are going to be able to kind of do some things in every single game. The question is going to be, particularly in those 3 matchups, is how's the defense hold up against the offenses of those teams. But I can see the Notre Dame offense being quite efficient this year. And really from a fantasy standpoint in regards to Buchner, the question for us too comes in more so at running backs, right? We had Diggs banged up in the spring. He's slow to come back. I think you might be able to answer this, but I think he's close to returning, right?
Coach Freeman said he's hoping to get him back.
So we kind of projected Chris Tyree to kind of open up the year as possibly the starter at Notre Dame. We know that he can be a force out of the backfield, as a receiver too. So we're looking at him sort of to be the guy out of that Notre Dame backfield early on, and then Diggs kind of getting a little bit more incorporated as the season goes. That'd be a question more for you. What are you seeing? Are you going to see more of a 50-50 split as we get those guys healthy? What are you seeing over there?
Yeah, I think Diggs is going to take the lion's share of the carries, and I think he's set to come back. Coach Freeman was asked about earlier today, and he said they expect him to be a full go next week. And that's all he said, and you could tell he was kind of excited about it. I think, obviously, like you said, Tyree can make plays, especially as a receiver out of the backfield. One guy that went down that, Notre Dame sources were extremely high on was the freshman JD Price from Texas. He was going to play a lot this year, and he was going to pretty much put his name. He was going to blow up, and not that he would have taken a ton of carries away from Diggs and the other guys, but he would have made a name for himself for sure. And losing him was a giant blow. As far as the offense goes, I mean, Notre Dame fans know college football fantasy, it ties into the real game. So, in terms of Buchner, he's got to prove he can throw. He's got to prove he can be consistent. We know he can do it with his legs. What's the big question right now with Notre Dame fans? Receiver. Receivers are going down. They're going down, and he's going to need someone to throw to. You mentioned Mayer being number one receiver. Probably would have been even if there wasn't this huge amount of depth. Right. But the same way Notre Dame fans are starting to hear about, how much Tobias Merriweather is, bubbling, and you guys are hearing the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, for us, when we talk Notre Dame college fantasy football, Buchner's up there, obviously. You got the running backs with Tyree and Diggs up there. Lorenzo Styles we have as a wide receiver one. You've got Mayer at tight end, who realistically could finish as the top receiver in the offense. But it's the other pieces and parts that really going to make guys like Buchner more valuable as well, right? You've got to be able to kind of create some room and some space. Merriweather is a guy that's really gotten some steam here, at least in the college fantasy football circles, and I think that's from what he's generated, the buzz he's generating out in preseason camp, right? So, that's someone when Avery Davis went down, that's a name that we're talking a lot, particularly. And, I don't want to get too deep in the woods here, but there are keeper leagues and dynasty leagues in college fantasy football as well. And young guys like Merriweather are definitely at the top of the list of a lot of drafts right now going into this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Merriweather has definitely shown out. He's only got there in June, and he's really made a name for himself. But I first laid eyes on him in person in January down at the Army Bowl, and it was clear. I mean, this kid is not just some tall kid. He's not just some tall, fast kid. He's a tall, fast receiver who can run routes and catch the ball. And that's what he's going to – that was obvious from literally day one of Army Bowl practice, and that's going to be obvious. It's obvious to the Notre Dame staff already. We talked a little bit about Ohio State earlier, and they're kind of stacked. You talked about Stroud, Henderson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. What did Notre Dame fans know? But what are they looking at here in the opener in terms of skill talent on the other side?
Well, look, I look at it from a college fantasy football perspective, right? I mean, you're going to be looking at one of probably, if I were to guess, that's the best offense you're going to face all year. The best offenses you guys are going to face are probably bookended on the schedule, right? You've got OSU to open the year. You've got USC with that Lincoln Riley offense to end the year, which, depending on how they start, you would think that after 11 games that they're going to be primed for they'll be kind of humming by the time you get to you guys there at the end of the year. The way that I see it from a college fantasy football perspective is you guys are going to have to be ready to kind of flip the scoreboard a little bit, because unless OSU starts slow out of the gate, which we know they did last year. Remember, they struggled against Minnesota in that opener, so it did take them a little bit to get going last year.
Too.
They really didn't start humming until they hit that real easy stretch in the middle part of their schedule last year. Might be a good spot for you guys to catch them, because if their start's anything like it was last year, you might have a start out the gate. But once when that OSU offense gets humming, they're going to be tough to slow down.
Yeah, no doubt. And before USC, they also have that matchup against Clemson. Obviously, I think people thought, wow, DJ Uiagalelei is going to be the next Trevor Lawrence. He played against Notre Dame in that, epic game a couple of years ago. Not quite the no doubter that Trevor Lawrence was. What do you see from the Clemson offense this year?
What's interesting is that Clemson's here's what I think when I'm looking at Clemson, right? Their defense is probably still going to be good. We know they lost Venables, but the talent on that roster is unmistakable, right? And here's the thing. When you look at Clemson last year from an offensive point of view, you have to assume they can't be any worse than they were last year. So if I'm a Clemson fan, you have to think that there's nowhere to go but up, right? You got Shipley coming back on offense. They've got talent at receiver. Really what it comes down to at Clemson is the quarterback play. My prediction, I'll go out on a limb on this one, but I think by the time you guys get Clemson, I'm not sure DJU will be the quarterback for Clemson. I think you might see the freshman, Cade Klubnik. I think he may be in there a lot sooner than later. If DJU struggles out of the gate, I think you'll see them turn to him really early because they have a non-conference matchup in there that could be a really good tune-up before they get into conference play. My prediction is by the time Clemson gets to you guys, you all might be facing the freshmen, and we'll see how the Clemson offense looks at that point. But we know that they have the talent, right? So I think they'll be better than they were last year for sure. And
you touched on USC to end the season. I mean, pretty much the two most high-profile transfers this offseason between Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison. Like you said, probably might take some time, but they could be rolling by the time Notre Dame gets out there shortly after Thanksgiving. What does the Trojan offense look like?
Well, you look, it all starts and stops with the quarterback play in Lincoln Riley's offense. I mean, when you look at his offense historically over the years, again, from a college fantasy football perspective, year after year after year, other than this last couple of years with Spencer Rattler, his quarterbacks have been top 5 fantasy quarterbacks year after year after year, right? I mean, with Mayfield and Murray, I mean, and he had Hurts that year. I mean, he can really, really generate some offense with that scheme. And Caleb Williams is gonna, he's sort of the engine that makes it tick, right? They bring in Jordan Addison. You mentioned 2 prolific transfers they brought in. The Blitnikoff Award winner from Pitt. They've got other talent there. Mario Williams they brought in from Oklahoma, and USC. There's no shortage of talent on that roster as well. It's all about Lincoln Riley bringing it together. We know that offense is going to be really good. I think for USC, the question is going to be how's the defense going to look, and ultimately by the time you guys get to them at the end of the year, that's maybe the team with the better defense is going to come out ahead in that matchup.
All right, real quick, and we talked about the top end of the draft. Any sleepers or breakout guys that my people in my league should not be listening to? Should they tune out now and just tell me who are some guys that you're looking at?
Well, here's the thing that I'll say in regards to sleeper. Really, I'm used to looking at it from a full FBS format, right? The one thing that I will say in regards to college fantasy football sleepers, and this is really where doing a little bit of homework comes into play. We've done a lot with the preseason fantasy draft guide in getting college fantasy football enthusiasts ready to draft today, right? But we know that in the next week or so, there's a lot of tidbits, news and notes that are going to be coming out of camps. Mm-hmm. There's going to be some depth chart changes and surprises that we didn't expect. I would say get on board now. Keep your ear and eyes tuned to some of the news and tidbits that are coming out. And that's where you're going to find some of your sleepers over between now and week 1, which is when the most of the season starts. Remember, we've got week 0, but there's only a few games on the slate, right? So not a lot of college fantasy football leagues incorporate week 0. Some do. But what I'm trying to say is you got plenty of time to get in, plenty of time to create your leagues, and pay attention to the news and notes coming out over the next week and a half as these teams have scrimmages. Sometimes you get guys that go down in injuries. It's next man up. And sometimes the guys don't even get drafted. And next thing you know, they're playing. They've already had the news with Sam Hartman, right, where we know he's going to miss time at Wake Forest. I don't know if he's incorporated into your league, but you got Mitch Griffiths, who has been named the starter. And the question is, how long is Sam Hartman going to be out, and where does he get drafted? And do you stash him and save him for later in the year? And how does that affect the other players around him? So the injury news that comes out and some of the depth chart breaking surprises over the next couple of weeks is where you're going to find your sleepers.
Absolutely. So like I said, we'll get a league up on ISD. I'll make a post in the message board, try to get a good indication of who's in. Do not be intimidated to join. If you're interested, join. I don't care how many people we have. I'll get with Joe and say, hey, Joe, we got 25 people in this league. What format do you think we should run with? Please join. I promise you, if you take it just minimally seriously, you're going to like it. We'll have fun. We'll get some sort of prize up there. And like I said, if you're already in fantasy, college fantasy, theCFFsite.com. That's where you're going to go. That's your cheat code. That's going to help you tremendously. If you have a draft coming up, please make sure you sign up and get the preseason package. And even if you've already drafted, you're going to need these guys as you're going through the waivers. It's one of the most important parts of college fantasy. So you're really going to need it. Make sure you get to the CFFsite.com. Joe, thanks a lot for joining us, and thanks a lot for all the help over the years.
Yeah, man, look, I appreciate it. I appreciate you allowing us to get all of that out. College fantasy football fan, get over to the site. Even if you're a DFS fan or love playing player props, we've got the projections for you. You don't have to be a college fantasy football enthusiast to get into the site and enjoy the resources that we have and benefit from them. If you play DFS, if you do any type of prop bets, come on in. We've got a Discord server as well. You can get injury news, player news, roster news. We've got it all. Christian, thank you. I really do appreciate it, man. Anytime you want to have me on to talk college fantasy football, man, ring me up. My microphone's ready, bud.
Yes, sir. We're almost ready to go. I know people are excited for, week one for plenty of reasons. And trust me, college fantasy football is one of mine. So we really appreciate it and excited to get going, Joe.
You got it, man.